It's recorded.
Okay. So we're going to begin.
Want to get started? Okay.
Hi,
Thank you.
Magda. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Very good. Thank you.
So, Erev Tov, everybody. Moadim l'simcha. It's good to be back again tonight. And this program is one that, this week's program is one that I'm excited about, because I think it enables us as a congregation to be able to showcase some of the wonderful, wonderful people in the community who belong to B'nai Torah and contribute way beyond this local community and have had an impact on the Jewish community for decades now, each and every one of them. So those of you who were with us last night know that we heard from the Lippies and their work with the Israel Tennis and Education Centers. Tonight we'll be hearing from Betty Kane, and I'll give a little more of an introduction to Betty in a while. Tomorrow morning at 11, we're going to be speaking with Dana Adler, and then on Thursday morning at 11, we're going to be speaking with Merrill and Ron. And they don't even need a Gallatin. They don't need a last name. Everyone knows them and the incredible work that they've done here. So, by way of honesty here, I will tell you that I also met Betty before I came to B'nai Torah. Before we were both in Boca Raton, and it's an interesting coincidence because it's through the mutual friendship that we have with the Lippies. And I just want to tell you about that meeting. And I thought it was really funny. And you'll think it's funny also, Betty, when you hear this, what took place at that over that weekend. So as I mentioned last night, I had the privilege of officiating at Sandra Lippy's bat mitzvah. She had an adult bat mitzvah, and the Lippies had friends from all over the world there that weekend. This was in Northeastern Ohio, and Betty was one of their friends. And Betty got up at the party in the evening and gave a toast. It wasn't just a toast. It was an extraordinary speech. And I remember sitting at my seat under the tent that evening and thinking to myself, who is this woman? Like, this woman really has command of the audience and was speaking in such substantive terms and was funny and engaging and just an incredible speaker. And then I learned after she was done that she was the incoming president of the women's division of the Jewish Federations of North America. So that in and of itself was impressive. But I didn't learn this part until today when I looked at your CV, and that was that Betty's a graduate of the University of Strasbourg in France, and she was a communications consultant, coaching executives and professionals in public speaking skills and media presentations. So it was absolutely no surprise to me that you were such an extraordinary and skillful speaker. Let me tell you a little bit about Betty before we enter into the conversation. She's a past national chair of UJA Women's Campaign, former president of the National Women's Philanthropy Board. She's on the board of the Jewish Federation of North America and has been a member of the JFNA Speaker Bureau and Training Center for over two decades. Betty has served on the board of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee since 1993 and now is emerita of the Joint. She chaired the European Community Development and Baltic States Committees in 1995 and 96, and she has traveled extensively on fact-finding missions. In her former community of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Betty was chair of the Federation's Women's Campaign and the General Campaign. And in Florida, where she now lives, she serves on the executive board of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. She sits on the Israel Overseas Task Force, which she chaired for 2012, 13, and 14. Actually, I think you succeeded me in that position, and I remember our conversations during those years. She chaired the Federation annual campaign, and she serves on the board of the Women's Philanthropy and newly created Committee for the Future. She and her husband, Herb, share their time between Florida and California, which is where their children live. So I'm going to begin with the following, Betty. There is something that makes you a little bit unusual amongst the women, the leaders in women's Jewish philanthropy in this country, and that is that you have a background that includes different cultures, that you, I believe, were born in Cairo, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and lived for a long period of your life in France before you came to the United States. So tell us a little bit about your background and how that informs your value system as a Jewish leader and specifically as a female Jewish leader. And that's a big question. So first of all, tell us about your parents and your experiences in Cairo.
Okay. Well, both my parents, the question people ask every time I say, or I respond to their question that I was born in Cairo, they said, oh, how did that happen? And I said, because my parents were born in Cairo. That is surprising to them. They often think that maybe they had a diplomatic position or whatever, but actually we're Sephardim, tracing our roots to Spain. And we have a very long genealogy tree, so we can really trace our family on both sides, interestingly enough. Both my parents' side and my father's side, my mother's and my father's side, both followed the same path in 1492, where they gave up the option of the baptismal font and the auto da fe and being burned at the stake, and they picked up and left. And the only place in the Middle Ages where Jews could immigrate was the Ottoman Empire, which of course, was a vast empire. And so on my grandfather's side, on my maternal grandfather's side, they actually made a stop in Venice. So apparently in our genealogy, there is a little Italian there. But because Venice was the western part of the Ottoman Empire. But eventually the whole family settled in Constantinople. And there were merchants, and the Jewish community was the only literate community. That is why they were invited in the Ottoman Empire. And they also had languages. So they had Hebrew, they had Spanish, and they had the ability to integrate languages. So they ended up also in the diplomatic corps, which is interesting because the chief rabbi in Cairo, before he moved to Cairo, when he was in Constantinople, was the ambassador to Holland from the Turkish ambassador to Holland. And that just tells you why they were so prized as a population in the Ottoman Empire. Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire, it was the last frontier. And when things in the 1800s were not so good in Constantinople, many of them made the trip across the Mediterranean. On my father's side, it was his grandfather who was in shipping and trading, import and export, and felt that he would have less competition in Alexandria than he did in Constantinople. And that's when my grandfather, Nono Bibas, was born. On my mother's side, both her parents also were from Constantinople. And they were educated by an organization, they're all Francophone, educated by an organization funded by Crémieux and Rothschild and Camondo in Turkey to teach French, because French was a lingua franca, and it was really the language that you needed to communicate outside the Ottoman Empire. And then they were sent, my grandfather was sent to Egypt to be the head master of a school, Jewish school for boys. My grandmother, she was also educated by the Alliance, this organization, and was sent with a few other girls to Paris to finish her studies with a chaperone. And then she was sent to Egypt to head an orphanage, and she was 18. And the two met, married, and my mother was born. So that's how we all got there. And what is interesting is most people wonder why the Jewish community of Egypt is Francophone, and that is the reason. the reason is that this organization had the vision that if you're going to be successful and also nimble in wherever you go, you needed to know the international language. And so that is a language we spoke at home. We learned Arabic. I know how to read and write Arabic, but my mother tongue is French.
So you left Cairo, I would imagine, or Alexandria when?
No, so we never lived in Alexandria. We visited, of course, but both my parents were raised in Cairo, and this is where the 5 children were born, in Cairo.
How old were you when you left Cairo?
And so I know I took too long with the history. I will try to move faster, but I did need to say that when Danielle and I speak about Egypt, and where many of our contemporaries speak about Egypt, we evoke wonderful, wonderful memories. We have this nostalgia about Egypt. It was a wonderful life. We led a life steeped in tradition, very strong Zionism, and a large family that was very united. And it was a beautiful life. And we do have wonderful memories. Also, considering where I was born and we were born, we were spared the fate of our relatives in France. We had relatives in France who were, gathered and sent to Drancy and onto trains and into Auschwitz, and only one of them came back. So we knew how lucky we were not to be living in Europe, although I was too young to appreciate it. But of course, I know that, and my parents know that. But our day came a little bit later, and my parents saw the writing on the wall, and my father planned for us. And as we were going to France every summer for summer camp, France or Switzerland, a Francophone country, my parents didn't tell us that we wouldn't be coming back. And so we left to go to camp, summer camp with them. We thought they were going to be visiting their clients. My father had a large textile mill. He had also a stock brokerage firm. And they were visiting the hotels to whom they sold towels and sheets and so on. And that's what we thought they were doing with our baby sister. And then he came back, they came back to the chalet and that they had rented outside the camp, the summer camp, and they told us we weren't going back. And I still have emotions about it.
Sure.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I told my granddaughter when she turned 12, I said, how would you feel if you went on vacation and then you're told you're not going back? You're not going to see your friends. You're not going to see your family. And that was emotional, but it wasn't terrible. My father created for us a nice situation in Paris, and then he left us. And then he went to Egypt to sell what we had. Unfortunately, they were watching him, and they arrested him. And then so we got separated for 18 months, where he was under house arrest. And then he fled. Somebody came to visit him. He was allowed to have a visitor a day. And somebody came to visit him with a passport and an attaché case. And he stayed in a house, and my father walked out. And I'm sure everybody was given quite a few dollars, quite a few pounds. And he made it to a plane, and we got the call when he landed in Geneva. France did not have, what I failed to say is the reason why they were watching him and why he was arrested is because the Suez Canal blockade took place, and Israel and France and England created a war, which Eisenhower stopped. But in the meantime, Jews were at that point persona non grata. and many of them ended up in jail, many of them. So within a few months, 80,000 Jews left and became refugees.
Wow.
So we made our lives in France. And I have to say that in spite of a very checkered history with the Jewish community, France was the only country that opened to stateless people, and we were stateless. We couldn't come to the States directly. Those that came to the States came because Hayes worked for a year, 2, 3 years, whatever, while they were in France before they could come to the States. So my parents came to visit, but they never moved to this country. Then a lot of the family left, made a right turn and went to Israel. So we have a lot of family in Israel. How did that impact me?
Wait, before you go on, how old were you and Daniela when you went from Egypt to France?
12.
That summer camp, yeah, and that was like
12.
When was that, the late 50s?
It was 1956 when everybody left. 1956, 1957, 80,000 Jews put their lives in a suitcase and left.
And then, then when did you come to the States?
But that's
A whole other story.
Much later. There's a whole phase of my life that was in Europe. So we went to school in France. And Danielle and I went to school from kindergarten to law school together, except she graduated. My husband took me away, so I couldn't finish my studies in Strasbourg, the law studies in Strasbourg. And then I moved to Copenhagen where he lived, but I met him because I was his translator in the summer as a part-time summer job. I was his translator when he came to visit a client. He was a consultant. He visited a client in France that didn't have anybody speaking English. So Danielle and I flipped a coin, and I won or I lost. However you feel about a herb, you know. So then I listened. So we lived in Denmark and traveled Scandinavia and wherever he's, 1 week a month we were in a different place. But then when I became pregnant, we moved to Italy to stay in one place with one client. And then that's where our first son was born. So David was born in Italy, and then I was 7 months pregnant when I moved to the States, and Stephen was born in the Philadelphia area, Cherry Hill.
Okay, so obviously you're not the typical Jersey girl who grows up and gets involved in the Jewish community, but some point in New Jersey, then you became involved both in the local community but also the larger community. So tell us about where your involvement started and where your work focused.
Okay, I have to go back a little bit because it all started with our love affair, Danielle, mine, and my whole family. But my parents were always Zionists. My parents had a foresight. My parents felt they took everything away from us. They took our home, they took our wealth, they took our lives and our what was our patrimony, I guess you would say. But they're not going to take our identity at the border. Mm-hmm. And they were very firm about that. And so for them, education, health, education, and Jewish identity. And so in 1961, the 4 older children were sent to Israel on a mission subsidized by the Sochnut, the Jewish agency that was working very hard to bring a lot of the remnant of the Jewish community from France to make Aliyah. And so there were these, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and we traveled to Israel. 2 things happened. Between 12 and 1, Magda is too young to know, but between 12 and 1, they used to go on the radio and actually say, Mr. and Mrs. Or Rachel and David Weinberg looking for a brother, and so on and so forth, to try to reunite people. This is, 45, 61, 10 years, 15 years after the Holocaust. they were still tracing families. And we had people on our group who found families. That was number one. But number two is that it was 1961. The summer of 1961, Ahmed was being tried. We were in the country where Ahmed was being tried, where people were lining up outside to bear witness and to show witness and to be witnesses with numbers on their arm. And we looked at each other and we said, had they been in Israel then, they couldn't have been a Holocaust. And that leaves you a very strong impression of the importance of maintaining the sanctuary for all Jews forever, no matter how you feel about the government. Mm-hmm. And so that was a very important thing. So I was predisposed when I came to America. But what was interesting is that I did not know the Jewish American experience. And it's very different than it is in Europe even today, very different. And so there is this organization that's secular. In France, the JCC is attached to a synagogue. In this country, you have the synagogues, and then you have the social services, and you have the Jewish community centers. And so I got a call from somebody I didn't know who thought that this new family that moved into Cherry Hill is Jewish. And so they gave me a call, and the woman on the other end, a young woman, said, this is, I'm calling as a volunteer, et cetera, Jewish Federation. And, we would love for you to consider making a gift to the Federation. We think of like $1 a week, like $52. And I said, wait a second, you just told me that I could help the people here, the elderly, the special needs. I can even help people in Israel just with my gift. And she says, that's right. I said, okay, I'll give you $100. And I didn't know until much, much later that the woman needed salts to, who expects that from a cold call. And then I took myself to the Federation because I needed a kindergarten, preschool for our son while, the baby was just born. And so I went there and I said, okay, so where is the rabbi? They said, well, this is a JCC, this is not a synagogue. And then we have the school. So that started there. And then in 1973 was the Yom Kippur War. And I will never forget that experience. And Herb came back from Bethel, our conservative synagogue, where there was a meeting. So he left straight from work and he went there. And when he came back, he sat me down and he said, don't get upset. But I just have to tell you, I just pledged to give more than we can afford. And I got up and I gave him a hug. And I fell in love with him all over again. And then in 1976, we went on a mission to Israel. And that was called the President's Mission. Lautenberg was the national chair of that mission. And it was, it was such a turning point, I would say, because at that time there were lots of Jews from different countries being integrated in the state of Israel. There was a lot of work to be done, and there was also a lot of pride in seeing how that small country, had grown in 20 years. It was 30 years, I guess. It was hard to believe. So I came back and was asked to talk about that mission. And the next thing I know, I'm campaign chair. I don't know how that happens, but that's what happens.
It was that speaking background that I referred to.
You're too kind. I think I honed my skills really doing what many of us are doing, and that is trying to get people to see what we see and do the best they can. And it's just been very rewarding. I've certainly gotten much more than what I have given. The opportunities were given to me. When you think of a Cherry Hill being a small, really a small community, to have been able to have been honed and moved up to regional leadership and national leadership. And you grow and you learn, and it only validates what you feel. It only validates what you feel. And to me, actually, so I met every prime minister since Volodymyr, or I shake the hand of this one or that one. There isn't anything that is more inspiring to me and more rewarding to me than meeting a person who taps me on my shoulder and say, "You don't know who I am, but I was dragged into a living room and I didn't want to, under duress, because my friend said you should come, because somebody from the outside, and if you come from the outside, you're the expert, as you know. So somebody from region or national is coming to speak, and you should hear." And I wasn't sharing my stories. I was sharing our stories. And she said, and you turned my life around. I have been involved ever since, and I'm on the line, and should I, whatever. So it's very rewarding. It's just very rewarding. And the truth of the matter is, I was given the opportunity to really see so many communities on fact-finding missions, just to validate where our dollars go. And then, it's no longer a line on a budget, but it's a face, and it's a smile, and it's a touch, and it's a name, and it's quite different. There are a few stories that I would never forget. So,
what were your experiences like in the Baltic countries?
The Baltic countries, I was chairing that region for the JDC, and that's interesting you asked that question, because very few people ask that question. But the community, we have started to do some work since the fall of the wall, since the fall of the Soviet Empire, with those communities, and try to help them reclaim their Jewish heritage. And the work that we had been doing clandestinely, really sub rosa, in the Soviet Union, where I was when it was still the Soviet Union, when you had to visit the refuseniks at 2 a.m, and you knew you were being followed. But now we could do it openly, and now we could actually create organizations. But we had issues there because the government was going to only give restitution money, communal restitution, not personal, communal restitution money, but only to the recognized Jewish community leadership. And that was the religion. There was a religious entity there who were given a beautiful school, but the secular schools for the Jewish community had a room here and a room there, was not organized. Plus, Riga was getting the large share of the money, and they said, but you can have the properties in those small towns. Well, the properties in those small towns were really cemeteries, where it costs more money to maintain them. It's not revenue. And so what we did was bring together, and there was a lot of animosity between the small towns because they all felt that they needed help. And so we actually created the Federation of Baltic Communities with my signature on it. And it was interesting to see how somebody from the outside listening and turning around and say, I want to hear your voice, and I want to hear your voice, how they all got together and they were all in agreement to sign that pact. And we created, and now we have a beautiful community center, Chesed. We create Chesed in many of these communities, in many of these countries. And we created also the concept of volunteerism. I was told that in Russian language, volunteerism does not exist. Everybody has to work or you are a parasite. And so as my son, who did some work in Russia, he was told, we pretended to work and they pretended to pay us. And so that was the mentality. And we created volunteerism, and we created today even philanthropy when there is wealth.
Was this
But more importantly was really to create the system. The safety net was gone when the Soviet Empire disintegrated. So the safety net was gone. We created that safety net, and we provided for that safety net. And today we help them provide themselves as well. So we create also resilience and self-sufficiency in all these places.
Were you able to promote Aliyah at that period? Was that good for the community?
Yes, we did. The Jewish agency, that was their main role, and they worked there and alongside us. But as long as they were doing that, we knew that not everybody was going to leave. And we knew that, as my own experience as a refugee, that it is not easy to leave. Whether it's good or bad, it's familiar. Mm-hmm. And to say to someone, now pack and leave to go to Israel, new language, new culture, not exactly in the best of neighborhoods, as we know, unfortunately, Israel is, but we would always encourage. And when I went on, my husband and I were very involved in the Refusnik movement. We went and visited, and we talked about Aliyah, and we talked about the potential. And but in our role really there was to provide the safety net and those sorts of services, but also to create an environment in which Judaism can flourish again. And Rabbi, there is a Jewish Renaissance. There is a Jewish Renaissance in Budapest, in Prague, in Riga. We have now for the last 20 years, a Jewish camp in outside of Budapest that I visited last year, and it was a gift from the Lauder Foundation, but really funded since then by the JDC, where we have been able to create this. It is really the incubator for Jewish leadership throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Those that are leading campaigns, and those are the heads of their communities, and those are the heads of their institution or their synagogues, they all give credit to their camp experience or Shalvash, where the grandmother would drop the child and then whisper, he doesn't know he's Jewish. I went to a General Assembly of Jewish Communities of Europe in Budapest, and with a group from the JDC, and we attended all the sessions. And then we had one program for the young leaders, and they came from all over English-speaking Europe. And we had dinner, and then they all talked about a program that they all were doing in their own country: Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, whatever. And at my table were two lay people, another person and me, and all the others were young professionals from different countries, Croatia, Yugoslavia. To a person, they said, I did not know I was Jewish until my mother went looking for a rabbi because my grandfather died, or because they got a letter from somebody from Israel and they wondered why, and they were then told that they were Jewish. To the person, and they said that I learned it last year, I learned it 2 years when they were in their 20s. So what we created there is not just a hunger because they were hungry, but they were really, somewhere there must have been a Jewish
the Pindala Yid, as we say in Yiddish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a Jewish memory, at least in their parents. The parents were secular. The parents intentionally kept that away from, but the grandparents, that's another story.
I was speaking to Betty a couple days ago, and we were talking about the music of the synagogue. And I told her this story that I had experienced in Youngstown, Ohio, after the wave of refuseniks came in. And that was a community that had a disproportionate number of refuseniks come because they were entry-level factory jobs. And a lot of these A lot of the guys and the women, they were engineers, and they were going to move beyond that. But at least initially, there were 200 people that came. And so I remembered on the first Yom Kippur when they were there, and when the music of Kol Nidre and the music of the service was going on, there were a couple of people there that were sobbing. And when I spoke to them after the holidays, they said to me, you know, growing up where we grew up, it was, I think they were from Odessa, wherever they were from, we kind of knew we were Jewish because of what was in our passport, but that's all we knew. And then, and the woman said to me, but at night when my grandmother would put me to bed and rub my back, she would hum the melodies. She would hum the nusach of the Sidur and of the Machzor. And that's what brought me great comfort. It's not till I came here now that I realized this was something that was so essential to us.
That's true. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah, go on.
Just very quick, it's very interesting that you say that, because we have a Zoom, family Zoom with my the five siblings. And so we evoke memories and so on. And now there is a resurgence of Sephardic music, and I'm sure Magda knows all about it. And so my sister reminded me that my mother used to sing this lullaby when we went to bed, Dorme, Dorme, sleep, sleep. And it's a beautiful, Magda is smiling, she probably knows the song.
Crying, I think.
And I'm sorry?
I think she's crying, yeah.
Oh, she's crying. So, you know, it's interesting, and I can certainly can relate to these people sobbing, hearing something from their past, because it's so, you know, it's part of us, it's part of us, so, yeah.
I think there's such a richness both in the stories and the music, but also something else. Are you familiar with the cookbooks of Claudia Rodin?
Is that what you mentioned to me the other day?
Yeah, I couldn't remember the author's name, but her name is Claudia Rodin, and she writes a cookbook. She's from Cairo, I believe.
Yeah.
And she wrote an incredible cookbook, but the introduction of it is all about family life and the culture of Jewish Egypt, but also there was a lot of exchange between Jewish Egypt and also Jewish Syria, and a lot of those families emigrated from one place to another.
Right,
and
right.
so the foods overlap too. And if you don't have the book, I'm going to give it to you.
I will look it up because I have several Sephardic cookbooks, and there is one Abadi that's very recent. And actually, she went to visit my sister. We have a baby sister. She's a physician and she lives in Manhattan. She came to my sister's to exchange recipes as well.
Well, as good as the recipes are in that book, the introduction is just outstanding.
I will definitely pick it up.
Truly teach us about the history of that. Along the way, there must have been some outstanding people some people that stand out for you. Who are some of those characters, those people that you feel really were able to create change?
Okay, so I have lots of stories that are not people whose name you will ever recognize, of course not. Mm-hmm. But they, to me, illustrated Jewish values. They illustrated, it became almost an image that you can, connect with. What are, Jewish values and Jewish injunctions? I was on the tarmac when a group of Chechnyan Jews came. They had escaped in the trunks of cars and in different ways, knowing that on the other side of the border, there was going to be a hand waiting for them to take them in. And that was the JDC, and that was the joint. And then they got together with others, and then they were brought to Israel. And the Nisimov family comes down, the young child, the teenager, the parents, and the grandfather with the long beard. And there was a photo that circulated around the Jewish world with me helping him up with his long beard. He kissed the ground of the soil of the tarmac at Ben Gurion Airport. And she looked at me and she said, this is a Jewish future for my family. And then I thought of, kibbutz chalutzim, the ingathering of the exiles, coming down one after the other, embraced, whether they came with a disease, whether they came with they were embraced, and we were part of that experience. And I, Rabbi, there's so many. You talk about the only thing they know about Jewish is the letter in their password, which is a negative, definitely a negative. So many chapters in our Jewish history have been written by those that have wanted to destroy us, and those that have wanted to eliminate us. Yeah. And we have been so privileged. I have been so privileged to be living at this time when we are writing Jewish history in such a beautiful, magnificent way. We wrote the immigration from Yemen. We wrote the immigration from Iraq. Certainly the immigration from Ethiopia, and we did it. We all did it because we all participated. And that's the American experience, that anybody can Isn't that cool that we can all participate in making the Jewish world better? Isn't that?
As you're speaking, one of the things that I'm thinking about, especially and it's a topic that maybe we won't get to tonight, but we're going to talk again to speak about the changes that we've seen and what's happened, in terms of the great changes in Israel, the changes in the relationship between American Jews and the next generation in Israel, etc. But one of the things that I'm thinking about, especially as you spoke about your experience with the Baltic Jews, with the people who made Aliyah, is yes, that's a national story, but it's also very much played out by and becomes so compelling by virtue of the family story and the person-to-person connection. And when you think about young Jews, young American Jews today, and even young American adult Jews, their awareness of those far-flung communities is minimal. And that the attachments that could be made with Jewish communities, people to people, family to family, understanding that, that which connects us, would be so important. And I think that one of the things that happened, and there are very good reasons why it happened, is both the politicization of the conversation about Israel, the dimension of it that has to do not only with politics, military power, etc., has taken away from that deep empathic connection that you speak of and that connects you so deeply. And maybe that's something we have to work on for young adults, to make those connections with people and understand, because that's what we've always done. We've always worked that way. My own family history is about Stuart Silver's grandfather. You know this? Stuart Silver's his grandfather was the sponsor of the visas that allowed 28 members of my family to leave Nazi Germany in the 30s. Wow. And so it became a very personal
I think it's pretty clear, Betty, a great reason why I'm at B'nai Torah is my wonderful relationship with our great rabbi. It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Betty,
thank you for telling me that. I did not know that. Yes.
As I did a little research, I saw a picture of you with RBJ, with the late great Supreme Court justice who's such a pride to the Jewish people. How did you meet her? What was? I know I'm jumping to a whole other area, but I want to get to that.
Yeah, that's
okay. Get to that tonight. How did you meet her? What was that meeting like? Yeah.
We can certainly go back to that conversation at some point about what you're talking about, because it's very important in terms of the people-to-people relationship and bringing in, making sure that the younger generation continues to have that. What animates our soul and stirs our hearts, should be there. Right. So I met her twice. I met her under the Clinton administration when I was national chair. We did a program, and we had a visit at the Supreme Court, and we had Janet Reno speak to us. And it was for the major giver before the Lion of Judah conference in Washington, D.C. And I had the pleasure of meeting her through someone who introduced me to her. And it was a quick visit, but one you don't forget. And then May 2018, the JDC gave the opportunity to board members to go to the meetings were going to take place in DC instead of New York. And there was an optional dinner, a special dinner at the Supreme Court. And about 65 of us came. That's board member and a spouse or an adult child. So we were a total of about 60 or 65. And we had a very free flowing tour of the Supreme Court, including the chamber. And then we went into this hall that is very, very impressive. I have pictures of the ceiling, was so impressive. And then this little woman, very, very frail, comes in and you could hear a pin drop. The presence was huge for that little body of hers. And then she sat at her table. Of course, she had her dinner, and then there was the president, and she sat at a dais, and there was a back and forth conversation. And she talked about she was humble, but everything she said was so extraordinary because she broke every barrier that were, in her way all along. And she's, she's just a very, very special person. You knew you were in the presence of someone that was so special. And I have a picture of Herb as well, but he wasn't facing her yet. So you may not have seen that one. I don't know if it's been circulating, but anyway, it's a major loss for all of us. It's a major loss for women, a major loss for Jewish women, and a major loss, in my opinion, for making sure that democracy prevails. Mm-hmm. That democracy prevails. Mm-hmm. That there is an independent judiciary. I don't want to be heavy on that, but yes. But to answer your question about the people that I have met, I've had very interesting conversation with Shimon Peres and with other people. I was in the Rose Garden when we were hoping that Arafat would change his colors. So these things are, really historic events. But having met Faina in Kharkov was even more powerful to me. And nobody knows Faina except for me. But two things happened when I was there. I went to the Chesed. It was Odessa, it wasn't Kharkov. No, it was Kharkov. I went to the Chesed and I met Vladimir, and Vladimir was a volunteer. We had developed a volunteer, adopt a grandparent volunteer program. And so he said to me, we're going to go and deliver the food packages that you guys are sending us to this woman. And I think she'll be very thrilled because she usually sees me on a Friday. And I may have told you that story. I don't know. If I did, forgive me. So
there are others here. So
okay. So lo and behold, I didn't realize I would have to walk up 5 flights of steps, Vladimir carrying the box, and we knock at the door. And then we hear shuffling in the back, and the door opens, and Faina, big smile, she's holding her cane. And she says, I knew you'd be coming today because it's Friday, and he usually comes and helps light candles and so on. And he said, oh, but today I'm here with your mishpacha. And she turns around, said, yes, the joint. That's the JDC. And she says, oh, she's so excited. So she grabs him by the arm. She shuffles with her cane to the bed. She's in a she has 3 roommates, communal apartment, I guess you call it, 3 roommates, not Jewish, not the friendliest. And she puts the box down and she opens the box, and out comes the coffee and the sardines and the rice. And she gets and even chocolate, because they barter that for services. And she gets to the very bottom, and she picks up this box, and it's 1 kilo of matzah. She puts it down, and she begins to sob uncontrollably. Couldn't stop her from sobbing. So finally, we said, Faina, Passover is, and it was cold. It was March, but it was cold there. Passover is around the corner. This is to help you celebrate the holiday. So eventually, she wipes her tears. She says, come, I want to show you something. And she grabs us, and she shuffles to the kitchen, and she opens the door. And behind the few staples that are hers, she pulls out a handkerchief. And very carefully, she opens it up. Out comes a piece of matzah, 1 inch by 1 inch square. And she said, you see that piece of matzah? This is how I have celebrated Passover for the last 3 years. When I know it's the holiday, I put it on the table, and there it stays for 8 days. And then I carefully put it away. And then she chuckles. She says, now I'm throwing it away because I know I have not been forgotten. And this is what we all do together. So it's very gratifying, very gratifying. So.
Well, I can't thank you enough for both sharing your story, but also opening your heart the way that you did. I'm glad that there are others in the community that heard these stories and will continue to hear these stories also, because they are what truly enrich our lives. And what we realize is, you spoke about going into that Federation building, or the JCC in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and wanting to see the rabbi, and that there was no rabbi there. And that we have to figure out the way that allows that significant, the central importance of community and responsibility for each other to play a more significant role in the integration of our entire community and our communities with others. So
I am glad you said that, because I wanted to say something about that. You have served on committees with me at the Federation. You have served on the Israel and overseas allocation. You have been a presence there. You are not a foreigner there. You are part of our community. And I have to say many of the rabbis as well. And what you bring to the community is something that is needed in tandem with what we do in terms of services, because you can't take the Jewish from the services. This is, I like to challenge myself. And so every year I volunteer to do a Dvar Torah, to write a Dvar Torah for the Jewish Federation system. And so in April, I guess, I did one on Behar Rabbi, president at Sofer, who teaches us as well. So it was Behar Bechukotai.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I really get into it. I read, from ancient commentaries to contemporary and I'm looking at Behar, especially Behar in the mountain. And I'm looking at, God says, the land that I give you to the Israelites is mine. But you are the custodian. You are the custodian. How relevant is it today to know that we are the custodian of the creation? And we need, and you talk about that all the time, we need to have respect for our water, for our air. We need to have respect for the land. And we need to have responsibility. And that's part of the Behar, which I have somewhere. I could send it to you if you're interested. But it gives you a whole list, of course, of the things that you need to do in order to be a good custodian of the gift. And these are the things that we try to put into action in the work that we do, in the work that you do. The fact that we come and we rent or buy the Sidurim, but we have to bring food and staples and whatever. To me, this is, I see it and I get joy. I get joy from it.
Yeah.
So
So, but what both of us agree on 100% is that it is the values conversation that we need to draw out of the tradition and then live out through our communal life. So that's really the most important piece here. And that's where religious leaders are called upon to be able to speak that language of values to our time.
Right. It was easier maybe when we lived through these, as I said, watershed events, you know, the gathering of the exiles, or Pidyon Shvuim and Kibbutz Chalutzim and Kol Arevim Ze B'Ze, the responsibility, and then you see, you actually put into action, because you actually made it happen, that we paid the ransom in Ethiopia so that our people could leave. We actually participate in that. Today, it's not as clear cut, and yet it's so important. And you're right, we need to have that conversation. Thank you for challenging us.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
Betty, Robin asked if you were going to write your memoirs, because she thinks it would be wonderful. Robin Siegel. So,
if I can take 2 minutes of your time more, I will tell you something, Elisa. First of all, I love to write, but I'm a painful writer. So it could take me a half hour to write you a letter, because I want every word to be right. But that doesn't mean I won't do it. That doesn't mean I won't do it. Something happened. Danielle, where's Danielle? Oh, she's here. Danielle can tell you about it just as much as I can tell you about it, but it is a coincidence. I just want to tell you very, very quickly, unless Rabbi has to leave, because I see you looking at the watch. Rabbi?
No, I'm not. I'm not looking at
the heat at 9 o'clock. He has an hour.
Okay. So are you interested in this coincidence? Nothing happens by chance. My brother, who lives in Palo Alto, reads the New Yorker magazine. You familiar with the New Yorker magazine?
Sure.
So he reads a New Yorker magazine, and you know, there are long articles usually, and he sees this graphic, this design of a gate, a wrought iron gate, and he's very intrigued. So he reads the whole article, and it's about a journalist for, what is he for, Danielle? Oh, it's for the New Yorker. Yeah, journalist for the New Yorker, who took his family. He has a set of twin girls. Took his family to Egypt during the spring, the Arab Spring, to report on the Arab Spring. And so he brought his family there, and he tells about the life in Egypt, and he tells about the Arab Spring, but also he's learning Arabic, and he talks about cultural things that are different, and he talks about this guy who is the maintenance guy and that guy who whatever, long article. But he describes this house. He kept describing this house. At the end, my brother reads his name and sends him an email and said, you know, you're describing a house that sounds very familiar to me. And this gate, for which you don't understand why, this house has this Art Deco design, and nobody can tell him why. I just, you know, seems to ring a bell to me. He's our older brother. He is 3 years older than me. And this gentleman, Peter Hessler, writes back. And so my brother says, well, our house, it looks like our house. Our house was on number 2 Ahmed Hishmat Pasha in Zamalek. The gentleman writes back, we're living in your house.
Wow.
For 5 years, this gentleman and his family lived in our house. And during that time, my brother and him exchanged emails and photos. And so he sent a photo of his 2 twins in front of the fireplace. And my brother sends a photo of his 2 twin sisters in front of the same fireplace.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then eventually he wrote another two more articles in which he told what happened in the New Yorker, and then was able to put pieces of the puzzle which it was interesting to him because he hadn't understood that, and then wrote a book. And the book was in the Wall Street Journal, got a great review, and it's called Daniel, voilà, The Buried.
Oh, Peter Hessler.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Peter Hessler, The Buried. And the last chapter is about us, is about our family. So Elisa, somebody stole my thunder.
With
Can
the
I
book?
say something?
I think you still have a lot there.
Can I say something, Betty?
Danielle,
Please.
I think so.
Yeah, he wrote, he said, he spoke with my brother for a year.
And visited with him in Palo Alto.
That was in 2018. And he wrote, but the gentleman was already back in Colorado. And at one point, before he published the book, before he gave it to the publisher, he said, I just want to make sure that all the information that you told me I was accurate about before publishing it. So he took a plane and went to see my brother, and with tape recorder and so on. 2 days, he came 2 days in a row. Didn't want a lunch, didn't want dinner. He just wanted to make sure he got the right story. And then he ended up thanking him and said, I will be sending you the book. And then he went on a tour book. Fortunately, I missed it. It was in New York and other cities, but my younger sister, Michelle, who lives in Manhattan, saw him. But he said to my brother, I have so much of your story, and it won't be able to, it would be too much for one chapter. So he wrote an entire article in the New Yorker, just about the coincidence and our family, and he, he intertwined the story of Egypt of today. And but interestingly, this week, Peter Hessler wrote his second article from Wuhan.
Oh.
He married a Chinese woman, and they met when they were both journalists in China, maybe 20 years ago, and got married right before they knew that he was assigned to go to Cairo. And so they decided, if we go, and they had two children, two twins, and they decided it would be maybe an issue with visa if we don't have the same name or whatever. So they got married right before arriving to Cairo, and the girls were 8 months old. I mean, it was crazy to travel to a country like that.
But
But
now
anyway,
he's in China.
so, yeah, so now, then he came back to Colorado, and he went to China, and he was there at the very beginning of, he was not in Wuhan at the time, he was in another, maybe Shanghai, I don't know, but he did go to Wuhan at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so he wrote an article that I read maybe a year and a half ago or something, but this week there is another article that's a second visit in Wuhan. So it's interesting if you have, but it's 17 pages. Every article is 17 pages.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, it's great.
Needless to say, the Egypt of today is
Different
not, you
country.
cannot compare it. In fact, we took our children. That was the one, you didn't ask me if I did go back. We did take our children. They were 18 and 20, and it was the most powerful experience. Unbelievable. We couldn't go inside. It was New Year's Day when we said goodbye to our private guide, because I could speak and I could guide and so on. And so we went, and I saw the doorman, who was not our doorman, but he knew our doorman. And I said to him, we lived here. He said, no. I was told there were Yehudim there. And I said, we are Yehudim.
Yehudim, yeah, right.
Yeah, Yahud, they would say Yahud in Arabic. So, but he was very, very sympathetic and very, he knew of the guy we knew, and he knew the family. So anyway, this is interesting. But it's a shame what happened to the country, because it could have been. If you love archaeology, there isn't anything better, more exciting.
And we have such an extraordinary history there, not just in the, the modern period, but also going back thousands of years. The Alexandrian Jewish story is an amazing story, and Rambam in Cairo is
Yeah,
a
right.
very important part of our history. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and we go to that out of the way synagogue where
Yeah.
the story is told. So yeah, and my brother was the bar mitzvah at Shar Shamayim in Cairo. So yeah, those are wonderful memories. But what was important for our children is that it allowed them. My parents were very, very open, and they spoke many languages, so they had no problem with the English. And our kids just gobbled every story, so they knew the story. But to be there, they were able to. I will give you one last thing to leave you with one last thing about that trip. We arrived there, it's very late, we're exhausted, and we need to run down and grab something to eat because we had a 6 o'clock flight in the morning the next day to take us to Luxor to start a Nile cruise. So I say to the kids, don't unpack, we want you out in 3 minutes. We're gonna go downstairs and grab something to eat. And so the three of them are looking at each other outside the doors, and I don't come out. They wonder where I am. And so finally, Herb said to David, just why don't you go in and see what's wrong with Mom? Where is she? And he opens the door, and I'm sitting at the edge of the tub. A mess, a total mess. I went to wash my hands, and I pick up a towel.
Oh, yeah.
I know the story. We know the punchline.
Out on the side is a label, Albi Tex. My brother is Albert. His nickname is Albi. This was my father's company.
Yeah, wow, wow, wow.
Amazing story.
That was the first minute.
Okay, so did you steal the hotel towel?
How did you guess? Don't tell anybody.
Everybody,
I will do another
Everybody steals
outtake,
hotel
but I
towels.
did.
thanks, everybody.
I
Thanks for
did.
joining us. And
Thank you so much. Thank you, Betty, so much. It was
Herb.
wonderful.
Welcome.
Almost
Thank
you so much.
you, Herb.
It
Yeah,
was
come on.
it was an honor. Thank you so much for
Great.
inviting me. I
Oh,
appreciate
Adima
it.
Simcha.
Thanks, Betty. It was wonderful to hear those stories.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye and
So
happy
much.
Chag Sukkot Sameach.
Chag Sameach,
Thank you.
everyone.
Hi, Betty.
Thank
you, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Betty, Cliff Sareski, nice to see you.
Cliff, Mazel Tov. You have another simcha, right?
I have them every month.
I know. That's so wonderful. Good for you.
Who's this
Good for
guy?
you. And I see Lillian and Morris were with me when we discovered another mishpacha, ancient mishpacha in
India.
Mumbai and in Cochin. Talk about ancient history. That was 2,000 years and 165 years before the Common Era. Two different communities.
Wow.
Oh, great. You're great. Rabbi, thank you.
Thanks,
Oh,
Cliff.
great.
Thank you
What
all.
a great,
Remember
thank you.
Thursday,
so
11.
Tomorrow morning at 11 with Dana Adler. Thursday at 11 with Merrill and Ron Gallatin.
Tomorrow night, we have an author too, who's really wonderful, Yosef Bashir, if anybody's interested in attending.
And you have a good trip wherever you're going. Be safe.
Oh, I'm going to New York actually to see my mom. Thank you so much. Thank
So
you.
nice.
It was so nice hearing you.
Everybody
You
be
will,
well.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Betty, it was a
Have a great
great
show.
program at Ellen Saffron. It's-
Rabbi, you need to leave the building because security is closing up.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you,
Bye,
Betty.
Betty.
Bye. My pleasure.
Thank you,
Hi,
Betty.
Fred.
My
Betty,
pleasure.
you're great. You're great. You're great.
Great. It was really it was wonderful.
you,
I didn't really know you, so I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to meet. It was
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Come
much.
back.
Sweet. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cliff, nice seeing you too.
Bye, dear.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye all. Vicky, you have to end for all. So I know
Yes.
you're letting people say
Daniel,
goodbye.
on se parlera en téléphone si tu veux.
Oui, bien sûr, plus
Good
tard.
night. Have a
D'accord.
good trip, Elisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
I'll see you
Bye.
tomorrow night because I'll be on.
Bye.
Thank. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.